Head Hopping by Jay Wilburn. The concept behind this story is sort of an inside joke. I have a bad habit of head hopping in stories, and what that means is that I move from one character's mind to another without scene breaks, and that's considered poor writing practice. So it's something that I have to edit out of my writing a good bit. But I wanted to create a story where head hopping was actually not only allowed but important to the story. So we'll see how well I pulled it off. I think it's not a perfect story, and it may not be perfect when I'm editing, but we'll see what we can do with it. All right, so Head Hopping by Jay Wilburn. Penelope Gago was quite used to seeing things and hearing things in her head. Compulsions drove her to do many things, but not usually like this. She ran from the hunters without understanding why she was hunted, or even how she knew. Through the fine glass doors and into the marble lobby, Penelope knew she didn't belong, but she had to get away. It was lovely to feel the warmth inside, but the security guard already rounded the desk to expel her. All right. She had the instincts of prey, and many of her predators wore uniforms like this. Alright. This was something she knew well. This was why she didn't try coming inside places like this. Like this much anymore. But the hunters followed, so it was time to leap. Derek Aberdeen walked with determination and planned to usher the homeless woman right out to the street. If he did it well, the bosses wouldn't notice, and she wouldn't make a scene. He wouldn't hurt her, but he'd use a firm grip to be sure she didn't mistake them for friends. And so Derek stopped in mid-stride as his consciousness took a step back inside his skull. He was used to deferring to others outside his head, so it wasn't a rough transition to give control to a more powerful authority inside his skull. Penelope looked about, more confused than she usually was. Alright, let's say he could smell her even after he stopped short. Let's jump back. It was a strange thing transitioning heads sometimes. Not everyone saw colors the same. Not everyone experienced the world the same. Alright. She couldn't smell herself anymore, but Derek gagged twice. That'd be two G's. Gagged twice from her odor. It was worse than body odor. It was something filthier. Alright. Derek was losing some of the memories he had carried over from her head. Her history was all in there, but she didn't quite know how to sort it. The downward spiral that had her living on the streets was easy enough. The fact that she was originally from Portugal was not something she normally remembered. Derek grabbed onto one particular piece that would be useful before it all faded like a dream. Penelope, She looked up at the sound of her name that sometimes she had trouble recalling. All right. Derek smiled. It was something he faked well enough, but it wasn't natural to him or the entity calling the shots just then. "You know me?" she asked, stepping forward. It had a desperate sort of hope in it. For Derek, even with that smell, it caused him to twitch down below with the stirrings of dark lust. "The dragons live in here, Penelope. You need to get back outside and flee as fast and as far as you can, or they'll eat you up, starting..." Penelope finished for him, because of course this was her deepest fear in a head full of fears. "Starting with my feet. They'll eat my feet first as I watch." "Run," Derek whispered. She burst out the door into the street. Fine-dressed executives parted for her in shock. Derek Aberdeen, security guard for the Porter Building on 43rd for the last 8.5 years, turned on his heels. The hunters may stick to her trail. She was motivated to stay ahead of them. It wouldn't work long, so he needed to move. God, he could still smell her. That stench would get on everything. Just wanted to be away from it. Well, deep in, okay, well, not too deep in his mind. He wanted more than that. None of that was useful in that moment, though. Okay, instead of that, let's say none of those feelings, urges, none of those urges were useful in that moment. Alright, so we got this demon jumping over to this other guy's head, and it's kind of moving into his thoughts and out of the thoughts of the woman that he had possessed earlier. So let's see where we can go with this. Alright, one of the other guards grabbed Derek by the arm before he could pass the security desk for the elevators. This guy, usually on afternoon shift, was a pain in Derek's ass. What was all that about? Derek decided to skip sideways into another head instead of wasting time talking. As Pierce Pandell passed the arguing guard, something like a thought bounced back and forth inside his head. Pierce did not recognize it as an alien presence because he had no point of reference for such a thing. His head was cleaner than Derek's, cleaner than most. Very, very orderly, and as far as the thing taking control of Pierce's fine-tuned motor skills could tell, Pierce was as clean as an arrow. Alright, that wasn't the right way to say that phrase, but one of Pierce's quirks that his wife, who he was faithful to, liked best about him was that he twisted up common phrases like that. Derek hadn't been the worst head he'd occupied over the years, but the old security guard liked them young. He just looked, but that was his secret. He'd even gotten his granddaughter to show him how to download TikTok. I think that's one word. We just make it one word for now. Alright. Pierce wasn't anything like that. Clean as an arrow, he would say, with his mousy little wife laughing behind her hand. But there was something. A little thing hidden deep down in the bottom of Pierce's mind. He dug down through all the orderly layers of this high-priced lawyer's clean thoughts to get to that hidden piece. He wanted to know what it was, because that's the kind of creature he was. Alright, let's keep going. I was going to add a little something, but I think that may be enough. Pierce stood in place, short of reaching the banks of elevators. He twitched. Let's put an ED on that. He twitched and quivered a little on his feet, but not enough for the busy people passing him on both sides to notice. This thing, this dark pearl, was so beautiful as it hid in the shadows of Pierce's mind. A treasure hidden so deep. Alright, let me put just a... Usually you don't put justs and that's in, but I think it adds something here. A treasure hidden so deep just had to be special. The commotion brought Pierce up out of his... Okay, let's say the commotion behind him. The commotion behind him. I'm trying to keep the story from being confusing because the demon kind of takes on the personality or the identity of the person it occupies. The commotion behind him brought Pierce up out of his internal search and struggle. The entity soared back up through the lighter sections of his mind. Pierce had his own office 3 floors from the top of the building and on the corner overlooking the city, of course. This delay would not back him up, okay, let's say make him late. That's probably what I meant to type there. This delay would not make him late because Pierce always left with plenty of time just in case the subway was delayed. A meeting ran long or a demonic force possessed him in the lobby. Pierce had time because though he was... I need a comma there. Had time because though he was technically independent, comma, the Concordate International Investor Services and DST Systems Incorporated was his only client. They essentially made up the whole building. Pierce pulled... Okay, I think that needs to be a period. Alright. They essentially made up the whole building. Pierce pulled these details together as he turned around. Alright. Okay. Pierce pulled these details together, let's say easy enough. Because again, his mind is orderly. Alright. Just as Pierce feared, the hunters hadn't been delayed long, and he'd been seduced by that dark pearl of a secret. Tatum, Inkrell, and Scarlet Mock ran from the doors. I think that's Mac. Scarlet Mac ran from the doors toward the elevators. Either Penelope had pointed out the building, or they were on to him. Either way, he needed to move. As Pierce blinked at Tatum and Scarlet running toward him, Layla Clark took on an extra. This needs to be an instead of and. Layla Clark took on an extra passenger in her troubled thoughts as she stepped onto the elevator, balancing the coffee in the cardboard holder. She stopped before she reached... Okay, balancing, yes. She stopped before she reached the back corner of the elevator where she felt comfortable. The doors closed behind her as she faced the back of the elevator. As she faced... Let's say away from the doors. As she faced... I used back too many times, as usual. Faced away from the doors. Alright, very good. The other 5 passengers glanced at her and then locked their eyes on the numbers as the elevator rose. Floor, one of them asked. She had to search the information quickly. 20 please. If she would have looked a little deeper, she'd have realized that facing the back of the elevator was making everyone else uncomfortable, but Layla thought that maybe she should get out on a different floor to stay ahead of the hunters. Layla was having sex with her supervisor, Chuck. No hidden pearls of secrets for her. Her dirty laundry was scattered everywhere in her head, and she had no idea how to sort it. She was afraid to stop the relationship. She had a sick mother she was caring for, but also stealing from. Layla tried to skip over that second detail, but the thing in her head with her, all right, now with her, the thing in her head now with her loved that sort of stuff. Layla thought she might have caught something from good old Chuck, but deep down, and not too deep, she hoped she'd given it to him from earlier mistakes. The elevator stopped and two passengers got off. The names Stinky Cheese and Grabs His Crotch popped up into her head. She assumed these were nicknames that Layla had given them. Their real names did not appear to be stored in her memory. She had nicknames for everyone in the elevator and most people in her life. None of them were flattering. Ironically, Chuck was just Chuck. "You're about to spill," Smells' hand said. Layla blinked and held the coffee level again. She did not realize the elevators had started again until it binged on 20 and the doors opened. She considered riding up higher, but then stepped out backward off the elevator and onto the busy floor. The last three guys in the car exchanged uneasy looks as the doors slid closed with her staring at them. Layla Clark was not a vehicle for quick moving or quick thinking. Too much clutter. The extra passenger bailed out the back of Layla's head and landed in another, let's say, mind. Landed in another mind passing by. Without missing a beat, Layla turned toward her desk as if this sort of disruptive thinking was nothing new. Chloe Gundy was not much of a step up. Where Layla was cluttered in her thoughts, Chloe's mind felt like it had a layer of grime over everything. Not that it was a problem for her to be in a dirty mind, but this mind was both dirty and uninteresting. The latter part was intolerable to her. Chloe's nose turned up at coffee, much like that old security guard whose name now slipped her mind. Okay. Let me keep working on this sentence. Chloe's nose turned up at coffee, much like the old security guard whose name now slipped her mind. Reacted. Okay, let's say was repulsed by homeless. Okay, by the stench of homelessness. This office must have been hell for her. Everyone was sucking down caffeine as if it replaced a good night's sleep. Alright, Chloe's nose turned up at coffee, much like that old security guard whose name now slipped her mind, was repulsed by the stench of homelessness. This office must have been hell for her. Everyone was sucking down caffeine as if it replaced a good night's sleep. Chloe at least moved away from the elevator. Had to keep moving because the hunters were on the move. Chloe... Okay, I've used Chloe a couple times. Alright, let's make this one a she. She at least moved away from the elevator, so on and on. Chloe had just that morning sent an anonymous letter to Charles's wife about dear Layla. Chloe, okay, again, I gotta go with a she here. She also put vinegar in Charles's coffee. Not enough to notice, but enough to give him the runs. That's why she had been walking up on Layla in the first place. Chloe looked down at the eyedropper filled with vinegar. She had palmed. The plastic sat warm and moist in the pit of her hand. Right, let me read that back and make sure that's good. Alright, Chloe looked down at the eyedropper. Okay, and Charles's, say, gross coffee, because she doesn't like coffee now, apparently. Alright. Let's call him Gross Charles. She also put vinegar in Gross Charles's gross coffee. So on and so on. Chloe looked down at the eyedropper filled with vinegar as she had palmed. The plastic sat warm and moist in the pit of her hand. She pulled up... Okay. She pulled up the memory of filling the bottle last night with her cats walking all around the kitchen table. She dropped it with a clunk into a wastebasket as she passed. Amateur mischief at best, and she had no time for it now. Sexist, homophobic caveman. That's what Charles was. Let's call him Gross Charles again. That's what Gross Charles was. That's what Gross Charles was. She hated him and everything he touched. Hated him to the point of distraction as she tried to find a way to escape. She liked to steal pages from the middle of... Okay, as she now tried to find a way to escape. Again, we're crossing between the demon and the other person, and this is partly why head hopping is a problem, but it's part of this story at least. She liked to steal pages from the middle of his reports before Layla delivered them in hopes of getting them both in trouble. When that bored her, Chloe stole things from the desks of others and placed them in plain sight on Layla's desk. No one believed Layla stole them, and Chloe couldn't understand why. The entity in her head found her ignorance distasteful. Alright, the entity in her head found her ignorance, I don't say distasteful, that's the wrong word. Let's say uninteresting, because I've used that before. Uninteresting. Alright, so there we go. She rolled Chloe's eyes at herself as she scanned the open office plan, to look for anything she could use to escape the hunters. Anything. Tatum grabbed one arm and Scarlet grabbed the other. She tried to struggle free as the hunters pulled her toward the elevators. Chloe wasn't strong. Scarlet took out the amulet to capture the thing possessing Chloe. She wasn't strong, but she could be loud, so Chloe screamed. "They're attacking me, help, they have guns. That created a panic. No one came to help, but everyone moved. She shot herself. I just said gun, so I don't want to say shot here. Let's say she propelled... No, you're leaving, so let's say ejected. She ejected herself from Chloe's head into the chaos to land wherever she could. Once she started screaming, Chloe didn't stop even after she was in her own head alone and the hunters had let her go. Victoria Hanbury went from frozen fear and confusion to fear and complete understanding as the new mind took over the works and started moving away from the hunters with everyone else. Victoria worked for Human Resources on floor 26. She looked for answers to her problems in that map in her head, but found none. So she kept walking on the heels, killing her feet. She was cheating on her husband a lot. It was a wonder she had time for anything else. She wasn't sleeping with Charles and never would, but she hired and moved Layla to Charles's station because he took a liking to her during the interviews. Victoria found out Layla had been let go from her last job for sleeping with another supervisor. She had been paid and let go with a good recommendation to keep it quiet. But those kind of things seldom stayed secret. Old Victoria had fed the poor girl to Charles. This was interesting stuff, but she needed to focus on escaping the demon hunters. Tatum stepped into her path, and Victoria knew Scarlet would be sneaking up from behind, probably with the amulet out. Let me put a comma there. I think that's good where it goes. Probably with the amulet out. She leapt. Forrest Adele was a trust fund drug dealer doing an internship on floor 20 to keep Daddy on the to keep his daddy on the top floor happy. He had done some interesting dirty things to settle his many hidden debts. All Forrest's bad habits were costly. A fortune in his name doled out too slowly for his taste. Such interesting depravity, but he stood too close to Victoria, and Scarlet's eyes fell upon him. Moving on, so we have the demon jump to someone else's head. Corey Storm took a sharp turn and moved against traffic away from the hunters. Corey was addicted to porn and was getting into deeper, darker things to get the job done. He was being blackmailed by someone in IT that had stored... Okay, someone in IT that was stored in... Let's use his name here. That was stored in Corey's head only as Ashy. Shouldn't have looked at that stuff on the office computer, idiot. Going against the flow of panicked traffic singled him out to the hunters, so off he went. As Corey blinked and turned to run the way everyone else was going, Madison Valero blinked and tried to be very still as she stood in one of the conference room doorways. She was the only female partner at Concordate. Very tough, but nothing interesting or helpful with shaking demon hunters in that fact. Madison hated every time she found herself trapped on 20. It was always a problem, hunters or not. The whole floor stunk of Charles's musk and his endless bullshit. It was kind of the aroma of hopelessness and beer sweats. Madison searched her head for any answers. What answers were there for demon hunters in an investment firm's office? Hidden weapons, secret escapes, anything. Madison searched her mind and found random facts instead of useful ones. She was Jewish, but everyone thought she was Latina, and she liked that, so she let them think it. She was going to fire Chloe as soon as she made a good enough case to satisfy that woman Vicky in HR. Then she was going to fire Vicky. She searched her knowledge of the other people scurrying around the floor. Madison didn't know most of their names. But then there was Eleanor Quickle, heading toward... Then there was Eleanor Quickle. Let's put a comma there, I think. Then there was Eleanor Quickle heading toward a different stairwell from everyone else. So Madison found herself alone in her head again without ever leaving the doorway. So the demon jumps again. Eleanor stopped short of the stairwell door as her eyes darted from side to side. She was surprisingly strong. Maybe this was the slim chance for escape that she needed. She'd have to be smart and precise. Old Eleanor might do the trick. She was a compliance officer with the firm. Nothing interesting about that. She spent a lot of time bailing out Charles from under all his BS and the idiot clients who couldn't stop breaking the law in the absolute dumbest and most obvious ways. Interesting stuff, but not helpful with the current crisis. Eleanor went by Ellie Quick when she fought in cages for independent MMA promotions. Ellie Quick opened the door to the stairwell with a smile. She had the endurance, let me go ahead and spell that right while I'm here. Alright, she had the endurance to run the stairs, and probably faster than the hunters could keep up, but she had other plans. She stood and waited. Tatum Inkrell stepped into view without Scarlet at his side. She wasn't sneaking up this time. This might be the only window. Eleanor turned to the stairwell and yelled, alright, I have spelled Eleanor differently a couple places. I think I just added an A in here this time. Let me get my vowels right, sorry. Okay, Eleanor. Okay, there we go. It's okay to spell it wrong, you just got to spell it wrong the same way every time, I guess. So Eleanor turned to the stairwell and yelled, Jill, what's wrong? Why are you acting crazy? What happened to you? Jill! Tatum pushed past Eleanor without moving her solid muscle on her frame very much. He also did not give her much of a look. Who is Jill? Well, he would use a contraction because he's in a hurry. Who's Jill? How's... Okay. Who's Jill? How's she acting strange? There we go. That sounds like a demon hunter on the run. Jill was the name of Eleanor's niece that she pulled up from the surface memory when she needed any old name she could get. Little Jill had gotten herself pregnant, and Eleanor was helping her get rid of the problem without telling her sister about any of it. Jill is normally so calm. I don't know what got into her. I was afraid she would hurt herself running like that in heels. Tatum stepped into the stairwell and looked over the railing. Okay. Tatum stepped into the well and looked over the railing as Eleanor followed. Let's just keep it simple, Jay. Keep it simple. All right. As the door swung closed on them, he turned and took in a breath. Eleanor guessed that the demon hunter had planned to call for his partner, but she grabbed him from behind and locked on a perfect choke. His words squeaked out into nothing as his airway closed. He threw punches behind him into her ribs and head, but they had no power. Tatum braced his foot on the railing and pushed backward. Eleanor hit the door with a boom, but the crash bar was on the other side, so she held on as he went limp. She held on, let's say, in the dim stairwell. As he went limp. The door swung open and Eleanor fell to her back in the office. Tatum... Okay, that doesn't work because the crash bar is on the other side. Okay. Would the crash bar be on the inside or the outside of a doorway? It would be on the inside. So the door should open in, so that's not going to work. Okay. So let's not make it a crash bar. But let's say the latch held. Alright, so need to fix this. Okay, but the latch held. So she tightened down in that dim stairwell. I'll say tighten down on the choke. Tighten down on the choke in that dim stairwell as he went limp. Okay, the rest of this may work. He threw punches behind him into her ribs and head, but they had no power. Tatum braced his foot on the railing and pushed backward. Eleanor hit the door with a boom, but the latch held, so she tightened down on the choke in that dim stairwell as he went limp. The door swung open, and Eleanor fell to her back in the office. Okay, that'll work fine. Tatum gasped for air as she released him, but she couldn't get out from under him as Scarlet lowered the amulet to her forehead. She felt the thing drawing her out to be captured for another stretch of eons. She threw herself sideways, but with Eleanor's body, not with Eleanor's body, but out from her mind. It was a blind rush as Eleanor scrambled out from under Tatum in confusion. The entity landed in another head that hadn't moved since the panic started. Charles Rowe, VP of Operations and Client Services for Concordate, sipped his coffee as he watched the strangers manhandling that ball-busting Eleanor Quickle. This was the first coffee he'd had in ages that didn't taste vinegary. He had left every job he ever had for some kind of harassment, but made a deal just as quickly and moved on to bigger and better things every time. Old Pierce from downstairs and his corner office on the third floor from the top was the straight arrow. Where he kept his darkness in a hidden pearl too deep to uncover, Chuck's head was full of such unimagined evil that it could hardly be contained within the bones of his skull plates. The darkness leaked out from his dead eyes and distorted everything he saw. I'll say gazed upon. People around him were nothing but empty shells. Most of them did not exist for him except the short periods of time they were in his presence. Even then, they were not people, not real people like himself. They were objects that talked, walked, and sometimes could be used as an empty vessel for him to pour in his lusts, and sometimes could be used as empty vessels for him to pour in his lusts or his what's the word, or his anger, or his or in his lusts, or his bored, or his boredom when he needed amusement. Nothing special. Alright, so let me reread that paragraph and see if it gives the punch I need it to. Alright, the darkness leaked out from his eyes and distorted everything he gazed upon. People around him were nothing but empty shells. Most of them did not exist for him except the short periods of time they were in his presence. Even then, they were not people, not real people like himself. They were objects that talked, walked, and sometimes could be used as an empty vessel for him to pour in his lust or his boredom when he needed amusement. Nothing special. The entity had hopped from one head to another for centuries before it was captured the first time. It had hopped many more since escaping the amulet again. Modern times had brought no new evils, new toys, new opportunities, but the evil was old and familiar even when abundant. Until now. The darkness of Chuck Rowe's mind was worse than being trapped in the amulet. The things Chuck had done, and the worst things that he had thought about doing, the things he planned to do, the entity had never imagined such depravity, and certainly never experienced such from the inside. Alright. Moving on. He forgot about the hunters a few feet away. He even thought for the first time in his tireless existence that he might have a duty to drop Chuck from the top of the Porter building and spread the pieces of his mind wet across 43rd. At the very least, he should try to open the skull against the corner of a desk. A being like this, a mind like this, did not belong in the world. Scarlet applied the amulet to Chuck's forehead with that shocked, terrified look painted across his face. He never saw it coming, not within all that pure darkness. His eyes rolled up. All right. Let's say, well, his cold eyes, so we'll do that much at least. I don't want to say dead eyes because that would imply that maybe the body had died, and that's not what's happening. Okay, so his cold eyes rolled up and he spilled his hot coffee over his chest as he collapsed. The demon welcomed the emptiness or boredom. Let's say the emptiness and boredom, because or sounds weird here. The demon welcomed the emptiness and boredom within the amulet. Part of him knew that Chuck was still alive out there with all his evil thoughts and plans. Someone should warn the hunters of the real monster, but that was beyond the entity now. This presence enjoyed the uninteresting space for the moment as its consciousness dissipated. It might never try to escape again after leaving the horrors of that mind. Alright, so I think that's pretty good. I'm not sure if the ending has all the punch it needs, but I think it's alright. So we may call that a success for now. So thank you all for listening in, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.